Her house burned down in 1 hour. Her apartment flooded twice in the same week. Her 17-year show ended, and the internet decided she had disappeared. She never did. Behind the most recognized face in American daytime television is a story almost no one reported correctly. Of a woman who lost the physical evidence of her entire life and quietly turned that loss into something else. What do you lose when 40 years of notebooks burn in 60 minutes? What do you rebuild when the flood comes twice? How does the most watched woman in morning television vanish from 30 million screens? And why does she say it never happened? But to understand why she answered the way she did, we have to go back to where she began. There are losses that happen slowly, across years, across arguments, across the ordinary erosion of time. And then there are losses that happen in 1 hour. On the 9th of August of 2020, Rachael Ray was at her home in Lake Luzerne, New York, a place she had lived in and loved for 15 years, a house filled with paintings and photographs and music, with notebooks she had kept for 40 years, with letters from her mother written over decades, with every gift she and her husband, John Cusimano, had ever been given, and every object they had chosen together as a couple. It was not just a house. It was the physical record of a life. A neighbor passing by saw it first. The roof was on fire. Ray and Cusimano were home. They had been filming her show there during the pandemic, turning the kitchen she loved into a television set because the world had shut down and work had to continue somewhere. The evacuation was fast. They got out, and then they stood outside and watched. 15 years of memories, Rachael later reflected. 40 years of notebooks, drawings, thoughts, my life's work. It took about 1 hour for this house to come down. What she described losing was not the structure. Structures can be rebuilt, and this one eventually was. What she described losing was something harder to name. We lost a huge part of the physical evidence that we exist, she admitted afterward. All of the things we had created, paintings and pictures and music, plus everything we were gifted over the years or collected together as a couple. But it was one specific detail she returned to. Her mother, Elsa, who by 2020 was 87 years old and technically blind, had written her letters and cards for decades. Rachael had kept every one of them, and they burned. That was the first thing that hit me, she confessed. Oh my God, I lost those things. Not the stuff, but the things that we all hold on to that are our nostalgia and our personal history. There is a particular grief that belongs only to fire. Not the grief of theft or accident, but the grief of erasure. When something is stolen, it still exists somewhere. When something floods, pieces sometimes survive. When something burns completely in 1 hour, it does not exist anywhere anymore. It simply is not. And Rachael Ray stood on the lawn of a house she had spent 15 years building a life inside, and watched that not exist happen in real time. She did not collapse publicly. She did not disappear from view. Within weeks, she was talking about it openly, processing it with the same directness she had always brought to everything she did. And in the months that followed, the fire gave her something she had not expected. A program called Rachael Ray's Rebuild, designed to help families who had lost their homes get back on their feet. The woman whose home burned down spent the following year helping other people whose homes had burned down. The Lake Luzerne house was eventually rebuilt. In November of 2021, Rachael gave a tour of the restored home, the new kitchen, the new walls, the life reconstructed from the ground up. But the letters from her mother do not exist anymore. The 40 years of notebooks do not exist anymore. The paintings and photographs and music, gone. A house can be rebuilt. An hour cannot be undone. That is what 2020 looked like for Rachael Ray. And the year was not finished with her yet. To understand why Rachael Ray handled the fire the way she did, quietly, practically, by turning her own loss into a program that helped other people, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the career, the beginning of the person. Rachael Domenica Ray was born on the 25th of August of 1968 in Glens Falls, New York. She was the middle child of James Ray and Elsa Providenza Scuderi. Her father's family was from Louisiana, with deep roots in Cajun cooking. Her mother's family was Sicilian-American, and the Scuderi side in particular understood food the way other families understood religion. It was not decoration. It was not entertainment. It was the primary language of love, of gathering, of meaning. You cooked because people needed to eat. You cooked because it brought them to the table. You cooked because it was the most honest way to say that you cared about someone being alive and present and fed. Elsa Ray managed restaurants. That was the world Rachael grew up inside. Not as a customer, not as an observer, but as a child absorbing the rhythms of a professional kitchen from the earliest age, she could form memories. Her first vivid memory, the one she returned to in interview after interview across her career, was watching her mother in a restaurant kitchen. She was flipping something with a spatula, Rachael recalled. I tried to copy her and ended up grilling my right thumb. I was 3 or 4. She was not describing a trauma. She was describing a formation. The thumb burned because she was trying to do what her mother did. That impulse, to participate, to contribute, to cook alongside rather than watch from a distance, never left her. The family moved when Rachael was young. They relocated to Lake George, New York, a small resort town in the Adirondacks, and it was there that her formative years took shape. Restaurant kitchens remained the constant backdrop. Her grandfather, Emanuel Scuderi, was a figure she spoke of with particular reverence. A man who grew his own food, who cooked from what the garden produced, who understood that the distance between the earth and the table was supposed to be short. From him, she absorbed something that would later become her entire television identity. The idea that cooking did not require complexity to be meaningful. That simple food, made with attention and care, was not a lesser version of sophisticated cuisine. It was the real thing. Her parents' marriage did not survive her childhood. James and Elsa divorced, and Rachael's early years carried the particular texture of a household navigating reconstruction. But food remained stable. The kitchen remained stable. Whatever else shifted or broke apart, there was always something being made, something being shared, someone at a stove doing the work of feeding the people they loved. She did not grow up wealthy. She grew up working. By the time she was a teenager, she was already inside the industry her mother had built a career in, bussing tables, working at restaurants, learning from the ground up what it meant to be part of a place that fed people. There was no shortcut, and no inheritance, and no industry connection waiting for her. There was work, and there was food, and there was the lesson her family had taught her before she was old enough to articulate it. That showing up, consistently, practically, without drama, was its own form of dignity. She eventually moved to New York City in her early 20s, working at Macy's Marketplace Food Department, then managing a pub called Agio in Albany. None of these were stepping stones in the conventional sense. They were simply the continuation of the only life she had ever known, a life organized around kitchens and the people in them. The career that would follow was not the result of a plan. It was the result of a person being so thoroughly herself in a medium that happened to be watching that the audience recognized something true. But that recognition did not happen overnight. And the road from Glens Falls to 30 million American households was not built in a day. What happens when a restaurant kid from upstate New York decides that what she knows about cooking is worth sharing, and that she can teach an entire country to make dinner in 30 minutes flat? The idea was simple enough that almost no one in the industry took it seriously at first. Rachael Ray was working at a gourmet food market called Cowan and Lobel in Albany, New York, in the late 1990s, and she noticed something that no one around her seemed to be paying attention to. People were not cooking. Not because they did not want to, not because they did not know that home cooking was better and cheaper and more nourishing than the alternative. They were not cooking because they believed they did not have time. They had been told implicitly and explicitly by the culture around them, by the complexity of food television, by the intimidating architecture of professional cuisine, by the assumption embedded in most cooking media that real food required technique and equipment and hours, that the kitchen was not for them. Rachael Ray did not believe that. She had never believed that. She had grown up in kitchens where food was made quickly, practically, lovingly, by people who did not have the luxury of time or the budget for luxury ingredients. And she believed that what she knew, what her mother and her grandfather and the restaurant world of upstate New York had taught her, was worth more than the industry was giving it credit for. So she started teaching cooking classes at the market. 30-minute meals. The concept was exactly what the name suggested. Real food, for real people, on a real weeknight schedule. No special equipment, no professional training required, no hour-long reductions or elaborate techniques. Just dinner. Honest, flavorful, achievable dinner. Made in the time it would take to order takeout and wait for it to arrive. The classes filled. Word spread. A local television station in Albany, WRGB, gave her a segment, and then the segment did something that local television segments rarely do. It got noticed by someone who mattered. The Food Network called. In 2002, Rachael Ray made her national television debut with 30-minute meals on the Food Network. She was 33 years old. She had no formal culinary training, a fact that the food establishment noted with something between skepticism and disdain, and that her audience responded to with something closer to relief. She was not performing expertise at them. She was cooking with them. The register was different. The relationship was different. She looked into the camera like someone who genuinely wanted you to be able to make dinner tonight and believed you could. The show was an immediate success, and Rachael Ray, to the surprise of everyone except her viewers, turned out to be one of the most naturally gifted television personalities the Food Network had ever put in front of a camera. She was fast and warm and unguarded, and she had a vocabulary all her own, yummo and evoo and delish, a personal language that her audience adopted and made their own. She was not trying to be a character. She simply was one. More shows followed. $1 a Day, later renamed $40 a Day, sent her around the country and around the world with a budget of $40 to eat on for an entire day, a format that was simultaneously a travel show and a practical guide, and an expression of her core belief that pleasure did not require extravagance. Rachael Ray's Tasty Travels extended that premise internationally. Week in a Day addressed the specific problem of the working household. How do you cook for a week when you only have one day to do it? Each show answered a practical question. Each show was, in its own way, a continuation of the 30-minute meal philosophy, the conviction that real life had constraints, and that good food could exist inside those constraints without apology. The numbers that accumulated across this period were significant. 30-minute meals alone ran for 26 seasons on the Food Network. Rachael Ray published more than 25 cookbooks across her career, with combined sales that placed her among the best-selling cookbook authors in the country. She launched a magazine, Every Day with Rachael Ray, that ran from 2006 to 2017. She created a pet food line, Nutrish, which she later sold, the proceeds going to animal rescue charities. She developed kitchenware and cookware lines that put her name on products in households across America. And then, in September of 2006, The Rachael Ray Show premiered on daytime television. This was the pivot that changed the scale of everything. The talk show format gave her the full range of what she was. Not just the cook, but the conversationalist, the interviewer, the advocate, the personality who could hold a kitchen segment and a celebrity interview, and a viewer makeover story in the same hour, and make all three feel like they belonged together. The show ran for 17 seasons. It won 3 Daytime Emmy Awards. At its peak, it reached an estimated 30 million viewers. It made Rachael Ray not just a food television personality, but one of the most recognized women in American daytime media. Full stop. She built all of it from a cooking class in Albany. From the belief that 30 minutes was enough. From the memory of her mother flipping something in a restaurant kitchen when Rachael was 3 years old and burning her thumb trying to copy her. Not a culinary school graduate. Not a restaurant empire heiress. Not a network discovery with industry connections and a polished reel. A restaurant kid from Glens Falls who paid attention to what people actually needed and gave it to them every day for 20 years. By 2023, the empire she had built was worth an estimated $100 million. The show alone had run for 17 seasons, longer than most television institutions survive, longer than most careers sustain their relevance, longer than almost anyone predicted when a Food Network host, with no formal training and a word she invented for olive oil, first walked onto a daytime set. 17 seasons. And then, the question the internet spent 2 years asking: what really happened when it ended? The fire in Lake Luzerne had taken 1 hour. The flood in New York City took less time than that, and it came twice. By the summer of 2021, Rachael Ray was deep in the process of rebuilding. The Lake Luzerne house was being reconstructed. Life was reorganizing itself around the loss. And the New York City apartment, the other anchor of her life, the place she kept when work brought her into the city, had recently been renovated. New finishes, new details, the kind of work that takes months and money and decisions made room by room. The slow accumulation of a space made deliberately livable. In early September of 2021, Hurricane Ida moved up the East Coast. Ida had already devastated Louisiana when it made landfall as a Category 4 storm. By the time its remnants reached the Northeast, they had weakened in classification, but not in consequence. New York City recorded some of the highest rainfall totals in its recorded history. Subways flooded. Streets became rivers. Basements across the boroughs filled with water faster than pumps could respond. And Rachael Ray's apartment was destroyed. Ida took it out, she told People magazine afterward. And I mean out. Down hard. Like literally every speaker in the ceiling, the fireplace, every seam in the wall. It was like the apartment just literally melted, like in Wicked or something. She was not exaggerating for effect. The damage was comprehensive, in the way that water damage, at its worst, is comprehensive. Not a leak, not a seam, but a saturation that works its way into every surface, every layer, every system of a building. The apartment she had just renovated was, in the span of a single storm, rendered uninhabitable. But the story did not end there. Because the citywide devastation Ida had caused meant that remediation teams were overwhelmed. The professionals who would normally assess damage and begin the process of restoration could not reach her apartment for an entire week. 7 days after the flood, a remediation team finally arrived to evaluate what had happened and determine what could be saved. And during the evaluation, during the assessment of the first flood's damage, something went wrong with a pipe. The remediation team accidentally ruptured a line. Water began flowing again. This time, it did not stop at Rachel's apartment. The second flood moved through 6 floors of the building, damaging units above and below, spreading the destruction outward in a way the first flood had not. 2 floods. 1 week. 1 apartment that had just been made new. Sit with the arithmetic of what 2020 and 2021 looked like for Rachael Ray. In August of 2020, her home of 15 years burned to the ground in an hour, taking 40 years of notebooks and decades of her mother's letters with it. She spent the following year helping rebuild it, while simultaneously launching a program to help other families whose homes had been lost to fire. And then, before that rebuilding was complete, the city apartment flooded twice inside 7 days. Most people confronted with this sequence of events would have said something, would have posted something raw and unfiltered in the middle of the night, would have, at minimum, allowed themselves the visible grief of someone whose life had been materially and repeatedly dismantled. Rachael Ray did not do that. What she did instead was continue. She talked about the losses, directly, without self-pity, with the same practicality that had always characterized the way she moved through difficulty. She described the apartment flooding the way she had described the house burning, not as catastrophe, but as something that happened, something real, something that had to be dealt with now. The register was not denial. It was not performance of strength. It was the genuine disposition of a woman who had grown up in kitchens where problems were addressed, not mourned, and where the next meal still had to be made regardless of what the previous hour had looked like. John Cusimano, her husband of now 16 years, the musician and attorney she had married in September of 2005 in Montalcino, Tuscany, was beside her through all of it. Their relationship had always operated somewhat outside the standard celebrity marriage template. They had made a deliberate decision not to have children, a choice Rachael had spoken about directly over the years, without apology or elaborate justification, as simply the life they had chosen together. They traveled. They cooked. They built a life that was genuinely theirs, shaped by the things they actually valued rather than the things they were expected to want. That partnership, the constancy of it, the quiet solidity of a marriage that had survived the scrutiny of 2 decades of public life, was, in 2020 and 2021, one of the things that did not flood and did not burn. Some things hold. Even when everything around them is coming apart, some things simply hold. And the thing that was about to change, the thing that would generate more public speculation than the fire or the floods combined, was not a loss at all. It was a decision, a deliberate, considered, freely made choice about what the next chapter of her life was going to look like. What do you do when you have built the most successful version of something you will ever build, and you decide to walk away from it on your own terms? The announcement came in 2023. After 17 seasons, after 3 Daytime Emmy Awards, after an estimated 30 million viewers at its peak, after nearly 2 decades of daily presence in American living rooms and kitchens and morning routines, Rachael Ray was ending her talk show. She framed it the way she framed everything, directly, without drama, with the particular clarity of someone who had thought the decision through completely before speaking it out loud. In my more than 20-plus years in television, she said, I have had 17 wonderful seasons working in daytime television. However, I've made the decision that it's time for me to move on to the next exciting chapter in my broadcast career. The final episode of The Rachael Ray Show aired on the 24th of May of 2023. 17 years, 650-some episodes per season. Thousands of guests, thousands of recipes, thousands of mornings. And then, by her own choice, on her own timeline, it was over. What she was moving toward was Free Food Studios, her own production company, a structure that gave her creative control of her projects in a way that the standard network arrangement, by its nature, does not. The A&E networks acquired a 50% stake in the company, a significant partnership from a significant player in the American media landscape. Not the retreat of someone leaving the industry, but the repositioning of someone who intended to remain inside it on different terms. In April of 2024, the first project from the new arrangement premiered, Rachael Ray's Meals in Minutes, a direct return to the premise that had made her a national name in the first place. The 30-minute meal philosophy translated into a new format for a new moment. That same year, she produced and appeared in Rachael Ray in Tuscany, a program that reflected the life she had been building in Italy. Quieter, slower, organized around a landscape and a food culture she had loved since her wedding in Montalcino nearly 2 decades earlier. By any reasonable measure, this was not a disappearance. This was a transition. A woman with $100 million, a new production company, a network partnership, 2 television projects, and a husband who loved New York while she preferred the Italian countryside. Continuing to work in the industry she had spent her entire adult life inside. But the internet is not always a reasonable measure of things. In 2024 and into 2025, videos began circulating. Clips from Rachael Ray in Tuscany, segments from appearances, short recordings that fans shared on social media with captions that expressed, in varying degrees of alarm, that something seemed different. In September of 2024, a clip circulated of Rachael telling a story about her friend Tony Bennett on Rachael Ray in Tuscany. Fans in the comments believed she was slurring her words. The clip spread. The conversation grew. It is important to be precise here, because precision is what the situation requires and what Rachael Ray deserves. No medical diagnosis has been confirmed. No physician has spoken publicly about her health. No verified medical source has identified a condition or offered a clinical explanation for what viewers observed in those videos. What exists is this. Fans watched clips and expressed concern. That concern was real, and it was expressed by people who had spent years watching Rachael Ray speak on television and believed they were seeing something different from what they had seen before. Their concern was genuine. It was not, however, a diagnosis, and it should not be reported as one. What Rachael Ray herself said was more specific and more grounded than anything the comment sections produced. During the first episode of a podcast she launched called I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, she mentioned, without particular alarm, as part of a larger conversation about her daily life in the country, that she had experienced some falls. "I like to help carry in the wood," she said. "I had a couple of bad falls in the last couple of weeks, so I haven't been doing that in a while." She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without self-dramatization, as a fact about her current life rather than a revelation about her health. She did not elaborate on the cause of the falls. She did not suggest a diagnosis. She noted them and moved on. The podcast ran for 8 episodes before going quiet in December of 2024. For the portion of her audience that was already concerned, the silence of the podcast added to the accumulation of worry. Where had it gone? Why had it stopped so suddenly after only 8 episodes? Rachael Ray addressed this too. And her answer was characteristic. She said she had been pressing her production team to release the remaining unaired episodes. The pause was not her decision. The material existed. The process of getting it out had simply stalled in the way that production processes sometimes stall. But by 2025, the question, "Is Rachael Ray all right?" had become a persistent presence in certain corners of the internet. Comment sections on her social media posts, Reddit threads, fan forums where people who had watched her for years shared clips and observations and theories, and underneath all of it, something that looked less like gossip and more like genuine affection expressed as worry. There is something worth pausing on in that dynamic. The concern about Rachael Ray's health was not, at its root, the product of cruelty or intrusion. It was the product of connection. 20 years of daily presence in people's mornings had produced a relationship. Asymmetrical, mediated by a screen, but real in the way that consistent presence over long time creates something real. The people watching the clips and typing the comments were not strangers commenting on a celebrity. They were, in some meaningful sense, people who felt they knew her. And when something seemed different about someone you feel you know, the response is concern. Not diagnosis. Concern. What Rachael Ray did with that concern, how she answered it, directly and publicly, in the autumn of 2025, is the part of this story that tells you the most about who she is. In October of 2025, Rachael Ray spoke. Not through a publicist. Not through a carefully managed statement released to a wire service. Not through the kind of crisis communication apparatus that celebrities deploy when they want to control a narrative from a safe distance. She spoke the way she had always spoken. Directly, in her own voice, with the plainness that had been her signature since the day she first stood in front of a Food Network camera and told America that dinner did not have to be complicated. "I never left," she said. "I just switched over to A&E and new partners, that's all." 7 words. 7 words that answered 2 years of speculation, concern, and accumulating internet commentary with the same energy she had always brought to the 30-minute meal philosophy. This is not as complicated as you are making it. It is actually quite simple. Let me show you. She was not dismissing the concern. She was not performing irritation at the public's attention. She was simply stating what had been true the entire time. That the story of her absence was, at its core, a story about a transition that the framing of disappearance had made to sound like something darker than it was. She had not left television. She had changed the terms on which she engaged with it. She had not retreated from public life. She had reoriented toward a version of it that suited the life she was actually living. And the life she was actually living, by 2025, looked like this. She was dividing her time between Italy and New York. The Italian preference was not new. It had roots that went all the way back to her wedding in Montalcino in 2005, to the Tuscan landscape that she and John Cusimano had fallen in love with together and returned to again and again across 20 years of marriage. But it had deepened. Italy had become, in the years since the fire and the floods and the end of the show, less a place she visited and more a place she lived. The pace was different there. The relationship to food was different there. The noise was different, or rather, the absence of noise was different, in a way she had come to need. "My husband loves being in New York," she said in the autumn of 2025, "and I tell him, hey, go as often as you like, stay as long as you want. I come to New York and upstate New York when I have work. I prefer Italy. It's quiet. The dog is much happier. She hates New York City." There is something quietly significant in that statement. not just as a description of a geographical preference, but as a window into how Rachael Ray had reorganized her priorities after 5 years of accumulated loss and transition. The woman who had spent 17 years producing a daily live talk show, who had maintained a presence in American kitchens and living rooms so consistent that it became genuinely difficult to remember a time before it, had found her way to quiet. Not as a defeat, not as a withdrawal, as a choice, as the specific shape that the next chapter of her life was going to take. Free food studios continued to operate. New projects were in development. The partnership with A&E Networks remained active. Rachael Ray's Meals in Minutes had premiered and established the template for what production under the new arrangement could look like. Rachael Ray in Tuscany had given her audience a glimpse of the life she was building in Italy. The food, the landscape, the particular quality of afternoon light in the Tuscan countryside that she had been talking about since her wedding 2 decades earlier. She continued to be active on social media, posting recipes, sharing moments from her life in Italy and New York, engaging with the audience that had followed her across 4 different decades of American food and television culture. In June of 2025, she appeared on a red carpet in New York City in support of animal rescue efforts, a cause she had been committed to for years. The same commitment that had driven the charitable component of her Nutrish pet food line. The same instinct toward practical action that had produced Rachael Ray's rebuild after the fire. The falls she had mentioned on the podcast, the couple of bad falls she had described while carrying wood at the country house, had not been elaborated on publicly beyond what she had said herself. No medical announcement followed. No health statement was issued. What existed was what she had offered, an acknowledgement, in her own words, that she had fallen, and that she had adjusted her behavior accordingly for a while. She had said it plainly and moved on. The internet had found more in it than she had offered, and she had not returned to expand the offering. This is, in its own way, an act of boundary drawing, not hostile, not evasive, simply the decision of a private person. A person who had spent 20 years being extraordinarily public about her food and her opinions and her kitchen and her enthusiasms, to keep certain things to herself. Rachael Ray had always been generous with what she chose to share. She had never been obligated to share everything. And the version of her life she was describing in 2025, working, cooking, preferring Italy, pressing her production team to release podcast episodes, appearing at events she cared about, was not the portrait of a woman in crisis. It was the portrait of a woman in transition, which is a different thing entirely. By late 2025, she was describing herself as busier than ever. The projects under Free Food Studios were accumulating. The partnership with A&E was producing. The quieter life in Italy was not a retirement. It was a recalibration. The deliberate choice of a woman who had spent 2 decades giving everything to a daily live format and had earned the right to decide what giving everything was going to look like next. She had watched her house burn in 1 hour. She had watched her apartment flood twice in 1 week. She had ended a 17-year show on her own terms. She had started a company. She had signed a network deal. She had made new television. She had moved toward the Italian countryside and the quiet her dog preferred. And when the world asked where she had gone, she had answered, "I never left." 4 words. The most Rachael Ray answer imaginable. Direct, plain, slightly impatient with the premise of the question, and completely, verifiably true. There is a through line in the life of Rachael Ray that does not require excavation to find. It is sitting on the surface of every chapter, visible in the restaurant kitchens of her childhood, in the cooking classes she taught in Albany before anyone knew her name, in the way she described the fire, in the way she described the floods, in the way she answered 2 years of public concern with 7 words and moved on. She shows up, not glamorously, not with the theatrical resilience that celebrity culture tends to celebrate, the comeback special, the redemption arc, the carefully staged return designed to generate maximum emotional impact. She shows up the way her mother showed up in a restaurant kitchen, the way her grandfather showed up to a garden he had planted himself, practically daily, without announcement, because the work is there, and the people need feeding, and standing at the stove is the only answer she has ever known to give. Rachael Ray is 57 years old. She has been in American kitchens, in one form or another, for more than 20 years. She has published more than 25 cookbooks. She has won 3 Daytime Emmy Awards. She has built a company worth an estimated $100 million from a 30-minute cooking class in upstate New York. She has been married to John Cusimano for 20 years, a marriage that has outlasted the talk show, the fire, the floods, and the full weight of 2 decades of public scrutiny without visible damage to the foundation. She lives, by preference, in Italy now. She cooks, she writes, she produces, she presses her team to release podcast episodes. She appears at events for causes she believes in. She splits her time between the Tuscan countryside and New York with the calm of someone who has decided, after 5 years of concentrated loss and transition, exactly where she wants to be and why. Free Food Studios is the structure she built for whatever comes next. The A&E partnership gives it reach. Rachael Ray's Meals in Minutes established the template. Rachael Ray in Tuscany gave her audience a window into the life behind the professional life. The quieter life, the Italian life, the one organized around the dog who hates New York City, and the husband who loves it, and the woman in the middle who has chosen the olive groves. She has not stopped. She was never going to stop. Stopping is not, and has never been, in the vocabulary of a woman who grew up in restaurant kitchens, learning that the next meal always needs to be made, regardless of what the previous hour looked like. What the last 5 years took from her was real. The house, 15 years, 40 years of notebooks, her mother's letters, the physical evidence of a shared life. The apartment, renovated, and then drowned twice in a week. The show, not taken, but relinquished, which is its own kind of loss even when the decision is yours. And whatever the falls were, whatever they meant or did not mean medically, they were real too. Real enough that she mentioned them. Real enough that she adjusted what she was doing for a while. Real enough to be part of the honest accounting of where she has been. But what the last 5 years gave her is also real. A company she controls. Projects she chooses. A landscape she loves. A marriage that held through all of it. And the freedom earned across 20 years of daily presence in 30 million American homes to decide what showing up looks like now. Rachael Ray never asked for sympathy. She never positioned the fire as a tragedy that defined her. She never positioned the floods as a narrative of suffering she needed the world to witness. She did not turn the end of the show into a farewell tour or the health concerns into a public medical disclosure. She processed what she processed. She said what she chose to say, and she kept moving. That is who she has always been. The restaurant kid from Glens Falls who burned her thumb copying her mother. The woman who taught a city to cook in 30 minutes because she believed they could. The television personality who became one of the most recognized faces in American daytime media without a culinary degree or a famous last name or anything except the conviction that good food, made simply, with genuine care, was something everyone deserved access to. She watched her house burn. She watched her apartment flood. She ended her show. She started a company. She moved toward the quiet. And when the world asked where she went, she said she never left. The woman who always shows up is still showing up. She always will. If Rachael Ray has ever made you feel like you could handle whatever the next hour looks like, leave a tribute to her in the comments below. Share a memory, a recipe she taught you, a morning she got you through. She spent 20 years feeding this country something more than food. She fed it the belief that ordinary people, with ordinary kitchens and ordinary amounts of time, were capable of something extraordinary every single night. What is the meal she taught you to make? What is the morning she made easier? Tell us below, because this community, like the best kitchens, is better when everyone brings something to the table. And if the story of Rachael Ray, the fire, the floods, the show that ended, the company that began, and the woman who looked the world in the eye and said, "I never left," moved you today, subscribe to Golden Fame News. We are here every week honoring the legends who shaped the world you grew up in, the ones who showed up, the ones who kept going, the ones who proved again and again that what you build from nothing is the thing that lasts. Rachael Ray built it from nothing, and it is still standing.